Hello. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. I always think it's Friday, but it's Thursday. It's lunchtime. Hope everyone is well. Nice to see everyone. So today, the topic that was suggested was setting personal boundaries at work and in life. FYI, my background is different because I'm working from home today. And I thought that would be a little different for us. Okay, so setting personal boundaries at work and in life. I have posed a few questions here for you to answer. If you could take a moment, answer those questions. And there's also underneath this video, it says polls and questions and topics. So the poll is just a simple poll, and all it's asking is if personal boundaries, setting personal boundaries is easy for you. I'm just curious. Do you find it easy? Do you find it difficult? And also, with the questions, what are some of the more challenging aspects of setting personal boundaries? Under what conditions or situations it is most difficult for you to set a boundary? What are some signs or indicators of inability to maintain personal boundaries? How much is TMI, too much information at work? That was one of the things that came up at another session. What are some signs of the inability to respect the boundaries of others? So I'm sure you've had the experience of maybe someone at work or in life that is known to cross boundaries. And what other topics would you like to see addressed in our luncheon conversations? So if you hear a little noise, I have my door open. All right, so I'm going to give you a minute to answer some of those questions and take the poll, if you wouldn't mind doing that. Can you let me know also in the comments area that you can hear me? Because I'm never quite sure if you do. So that would be helpful. So tick tock, just waiting a couple of minutes. So while you're doing that, I actually have, I pulled one of my coaching tools here on boundaries, which for those people who are live, I will be sending you a download on how to maintain one's boundaries and how to be aware of when your boundaries are being crossed. So let me talk first about what I consider as a boundary, which may not be what most people do. I actually don't think of boundaries as something that keeps people out. I don't. I suppose it does that to a certain extent, but that's not actually how I think about it. I actually think of setting personal boundaries as a way of maintaining my wholeness, my integrity, or my sense of wholeness. I don't mean integrity and sense of ethics, but integrity and sense of wholeness. So what keeps me well? What keeps me healthy in mind and body and spirit? What maintains my well-being? And that's how I set a boundary. And so when someone's crossing that boundary, it's compromising me in some way. Now, the question is, there's always going to be times where boundaries are going to be crossed, and I could even be aware of it. But the question then becomes, am I consciously aware of someone crossing my boundary, and am I consciously making the decision to allow that to happen for the sake of what? So let's say, just as an example, let's say someone says to me, I have a project that's due to it today, and I need this piece of information. It's really, really, really important. And I know that you're overwhelmed, but could you please do this for me? And if I'm overwhelmed, I've got my own projects, I could say, no, I can't do that for you, because maybe I'm maintaining a boundary around getting home at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time it is. And I know that this will take longer. But I could also consciously choose to let that boundary go and say, you know what, this is really important for someone. And just this once, yes, I'm willing to do that for you. I can do this for you, and I'll stay late for that. And then I'll make arrangements. So that's a bit of, yeah, it it kind of compromises what I've set as a boundary, you know, in terms of getting home on time. And this is a really simplistic kind of example. But I'm doing it with consciousness. I'm doing it with awareness. And the problem with people crossing boundaries or allowing people to cross your boundaries is that you don't do it consciously. You're not aware that there's a boundary that's been crossed until it's way too late. And then it's really hard to pedal backwards. So, and the reason you're not aware is because you never really think about what those boundaries are. And in order to think about how am I going to set my boundaries, where am I going to draw that line so that I can maintain my wellness, you have to think about what that means to you. And it means different things to different people. So there are certain boundaries that I set because they support my definition of my wellness and my well-being. It might not be your definition of wellness and well-being, right? Or how I use my time as an example. So the first thing you do when you're trying to set personal boundaries is to determine what keeps you well, what maintains that wholeness. So people aren't like dragging your energy from you or depleting you. And that's a really good way of looking at boundaries, is asking yourself, okay, in this column, these things energize me and maintain my wellness. In this column over here, these things deplete me and in some way diminish my capacity to either work or be a friend or do whatever. It becomes fairly easy. Hi, Claudia, I just saw you on. It becomes fairly easy if you think about it in those two chunks and if you think about it by energy, okay? So there are certain commitments you make that deplete you and certain commitments that you make that energize you. Now, the commitments that you make that deplete you, sometimes we have to make a commitment that depletes us, but it's finite. It's not forever. It's not over and over and over again. So that's what you want to think about. But generally speaking, some commitments that you make are the ones that deplete you, or the ones that you say, I should never have said yes to that. Does anybody sound, does that sound familiar to some of you? Yes, I should never have said yes to that. And you kind of realize it when it's too late and you've already made that commitment. So live and learn. Next time you've set a boundary and you know, I can't commit to that. Ooh, we should talk about saying no. I got to make myself a note. Okay. So 2 columns. This energizes me. This depletes me. The other thing about that is really understanding what energizes you in terms of your relationships. And relationships are that really delicate place because there are people we love, there are people we like, there are people we like to spend time with, there are people we don't want to disappoint. It goes on and on and on. So setting personal boundaries in terms of what relationships either deplete you or inspire you, energize you, that's a little tricky. It's a little difficult for most people. And that's where most people fall down and say, oh, well, she really needed my help. So I did this and this and this. And I'm going to go through a couple of things that are indicators that your boundaries are being crossed. So it's commitments, it's relationships, and it's tasks and activities. So as an example, I had a client not too long ago, and she was really focused on starting a business. And it's pretty overwhelming when you begin and you start a business. Plus, she had 2 little kids, like under the age of 10. And her girlfriends would say, oh, we're going out today, tonight for drinks. Can you go out? And she knew that if she went out, it would be late. That means she'd have to find a babysitter. Her husband would have to take the kids. And she's young. She's in her late 20s. So she's still into, going out with her girlfriends, and doing fun things. And she had the hardest time saying no to them. And so she would go out and she would be exhausted. And then the next day, she wouldn't really work on her business because she wasn't clear. She was tired. That's one of the things that we talked about is these kinds of activities deplete you. It doesn't mean you never go out. It means that you have to have the ability to say no, even to your friends who want you to have a good time, but it doesn't serve you in the moment. It doesn't serve you for the thing that's bigger than that. So when you compare, how important starting your business and making it successful is to going out for a night on the town with the girls, there's a big dramatic difference, right? And so being clear on what is really important to you so that you can create and maintain those boundaries is really important. And one of the problems she had was saying no. So I want to go to saying no, because I know a lot of women who have real problems saying no to people, right? So maybe it's too hard for you to say no. So let's talk about some alternatives to saying no. So you are asked to do something and you want to do it, or you think you want to do it, but you also know that you're tired or that you have other things going on. And a part of you really does know that you should be saying no, but you don't want to disappoint the other person or whatever it is. If you can't say no, then what you can say is, look, I need to think about this. I will get back to you, and then give them a time, 5 o'clock today or tomorrow morning. I need to check my calendar. I need to check my other commitments. Let me get back to you. That's one way of doing it. And it creates some space between the request and your answer. And it kind of diminishes that knee-jerk reaction of saying yes to everything. So creating some space by saying, I need to think about it. Let me check my schedule. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me. I was asked to be on the board of an organization. And it's a great organization. It's not one that I would have actively sought out. It's not in my passion bucket, if you will, but it does good work. And the first thing I asked was, you have to define the commitment. I don't know what I would be saying yes to. And this is the other thing. Sometimes we say yes to things without understanding what the commitment really is. In terms of, my question was, how much time does it take? How often do we meet? What's the work expected? What are the requirements? What am I expected to do or contribute? And how often? And how much? And what is it that I'm expected to be, an active participant in versus a passive participant in? So I was trying to gauge how much time that commitment actually meant. And when I finally did get the answers, I weighed the answers against how passionate I was about it. And I realized that if I said yes to it, I would be saying no to some other things that were more important to me. Now, so that's the lesson, right? It's understanding what's important to you. And so I wasn't willing, because that kind of is a boundary too. I wasn't willing to take energy away from something that's really, really important to me for something that isn't that important to me. So, it would be great to be on the board. I'd love it, but not now, not today, not during this particular moment. And so that's the other thing. You're saying no, maybe you're saying it for now. Maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, you go back and you're ready for that commitment. You're ready to sit on that board. So for me, it was taking away from something that was much more important to me. And so that's part of my personal boundaries. So really understanding what's important to you, because every time you say yes to something, yes, it's true. You do say no to something else. And oftentimes you're saying no to yourself, or to your well-being, or to your time at home, or to that hour that you have to work out during the day that you struggle to get to, because you have to carve that time out. So that's part of setting boundaries. So I'm going to take a look at some of the answers. I'm scrolling down right now. Some of the answers to the question. So what is the most challenging aspect of setting personal boundaries? The challenges of setting personal boundaries at work is when managing a division that operates 24/7, different layers of managers are in place within the 24-hour operations, yet you are still committed to support your division. So is the question, Ophelia, in place within the 24 hours, yet you are still committed? I think for me, the question is, how do you define supporting your division? And so there's two things for me in your question, Ophelia. One is, how do you define supporting your division? And two, how are you coaching, mentoring, or training those managers so that they have the authority and the critical thinking skills to be able to make decisions in your absence because you can't be there 24 hours. So it's two things right there. You know, what is it that you define as support, and what are you doing to actively train, mentor, or coach those managers so that they are making decisions that are good decisions. So you're teaching them critical thinking skills as well, because in 24 you're not going to be there 24 hours. So Ophelia, I'm just going to look in the comments area and see how you comment on that. You also asked, what are some signs or indicators of inability to maintain personal boundaries? Accepting meetings or meeting people outside of identified time set as personal. Accepting meetings or meeting people outside of identified time set as personal. I don't really know what that means. Are you saying this is not work related? So one of the things about accepting meetings or meeting people outside of identified time set as personal. I don't know what you mean there, Ophelia. If you could clarify what you mean. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I often get phone calls that say, I would love to meet you for lunch and pick your brain. And I always thought that is such an awful statement. Sorry. But like, pick your brain sounds really, when you think about it, it's like really awful, right? And it makes me feel like someone's using me. And I know it's a language thing. I know that people say this all the time, but it really bothers me. And so I'm thinking, okay, so you're telling me that for the price of a cup of coffee, you're going to have knowledge, experience, and wisdom for the price of coffee. I don't know how that works. So this is a personal pet peeve of mine, so I admit to that. Busy people who are well-known often have this happen to them. And it's a kind of request to take something from me. That's the way I look at it, okay? Which is very, very different when someone says to me, I have this project or I have this situation and I could really use 5 or 10 minutes of your time to help me resolve it. That's a different request for me. It tells me exactly how much time I can dedicate to it or that they're asking for. And it tells me why. It's not necessarily picking my brain over I don't know what, but it's I have a problem. Here's the problem. And can you just spend 5 or 10 minutes? I'm really likely to say yes. Now, am I likely to go for coffee? No. I'm likely to say, yes, let's schedule a phone call. And it will be a 15-minute phone call. Because, I don't care about going to coffee and I don't care about going to lunch. It's time for me, and time is really important. And so if Ophelia, you're talking about, yeah, I get what she's saying. If you're talking about people who are trying to set up meetings with you outside your normal, if you will, you really need to be careful about why you're committing that time. And honestly, it's kind of what's in it for me question, right? And so I talk about being the center of your universe in a good way. And what I mean when I say center of you have to take care of yourself first. And then everything else comes after that. So Ophelia writes, for example, in my daily work life, I have identified that 6:30 is my off time from work and the beginning of my personal time. Yet I end up meeting people at past my personal time. So you're either making a conscious or unconscious choice to infringe on your personal time. I hate to be so blunt, but I think you already know I'm kind of open like that. So it's a level of awareness. If you know you're doing that, then the question is there value for you in meeting people past your personal time? If there's value and you're saying very aware, and very consciously, okay, I'm going to meet this person because we need to discuss this, or I need to get this information from them, or whatever it is, and it's worth giving up your personal time for, and I would say limit that. So is that a half hour? Is that an hour? Not 5 hours or something. It's a choice, Ophelia. And you have to either choose for yourself or choose for others. And it sounds like you're choosing for others at your expense. And this is where your boundaries get crossed. But the thing is, you're allowing that to happen by not being able to say to that person, let's assume that it's not worth your personal time. And it's just something that you like to do. Instead of that, you could say to them, look, I'm off at 6:30 and I would just say, it's my personal time. We can either do it during the day, and we can make an appointment for a 15-minute conversation or a half-hour phone call or whatever works for you. Or we could table it, for next month when I have more time. And I guarantee you they'll all of a sudden say to you, no, it'll only take 15 minutes. We can do it by phone. So there's a way of qualifying, if you will, qualifying the request. So what does this really mean? So if they ask you for, meeting you outside of work, past your personal time, is that really necessary? Or could that be done in a 5-minute phone call during the day? Chances are it can be done during the day in a 5 or 10-minute phone call. Maybe not. Not always. But you need to ask that question. So when you get the request for a meeting during your personal time, Ophelia, don't say yes. Just try this for the next week. Don't automatically say yes. Here's a couple of things you can say, okay? You could say, what is this about? And can we do it in a 15-minute phone call tomorrow at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock, whatever time, all right? So what is this about is the qualifying question. In other words, that'll give you an indication of how much time it really does take. And does it really require a meeting, or can you do it over the phone or over email? Okay. And then setting a limit. It's a 15-minute phone call. It's a 20-minute phone call, or whatever it is. The thing is, you get to choose. You get to decide. Just because a request is made does not mean you have to say yes, especially if you're finding that it's infringing on your personal time, because we don't have a lot of personal time. So I consider my personal time pretty sacred time, and I put myself at choice. And I'm kind of past whether or not it upsets someone, because if it upsets someone, then they must not really care about me. And if they don't care about me, I got to ask, why are they in my life? So that's kind of, I've become a little intolerant, but it's because it allows me to do so many more things that are so much more valuable for me and so much more important for me. And, I'll give you an example, which sounds sort of strange, but I love to kayak. It's one of the things I do. And so if I've scheduled Tuesday to go kayaking, because I know it's going to be a beautiful day, and someone says, can you meet me on Tuesday at 2 o'clock? And, it's a client meeting, even a client meeting. I'll say, no, I have an appointment on Tuesday. I'm not going to be available. Can we do it Wednesday or Thursday? 9 out of 10 times, they say yes. And if not, then we'll find another day in any case. So I think we have a subconscious kind of thing that says, I have to say yes, and then we fill in that blank, like, or awful things are going to happen, or they're not going to like me, or I'm going to lose the piece of business. Whatever that or is after that, whatever is after that or is an assumption on your part. It's probably not real. It's based on a fear, which is based on a need to have more business, to be accepted, to be liked, whatever you want to, to be in the know, to be informed. So oftentimes when we're saying yes, and we're doing it based on a fear of losing out on something, all right? So that's the question that you have to ask yourself. If you're saying yes to things that are infringing on your personal time or what's important to you, what are you afraid of? Like, if you said no, what is it that you think you stand to lose? Chances are it's not real. Chances are you wouldn't lose that if you said, no, I can't do it during, my personal time. I could do it during work time. I could do it, 15-minute call at 10 o'clock. So that's something I want you to think about, because that's important when we're talking about setting boundaries, right? Comments, pause. I'm on pause now. Comments. And also, I noticed no one's taken the poll. Please go to the poll area. And it's an easy question. Setting personal boundaries is easy for me. One person has voted sometimes. I shouldn't have put sometimes in. I should have just left it yes or no. I think sometimes. So do take the poll, and any more questions and topics, right? So if someone voted, oh, here's a vote, good. How much is TMI at work? Too much information. So the interesting thing about that is, okay, so I'm going to give you a distinction. I'm going to give you a distinction between friendly and familiar, okay? Claudia, good, Claudia. I like your comment. Cindy, I like that you were saying to say no by offering an alternative. Yeah, Cindy. That way it's not like a real abrupt no. It's like, I can't do this. It's actually a negotiation, really, kind of. You're making a counteroffer, right? You're saying, I can't do this, but I could do this other thing. So I think that's a great alternative to saying no. And it's useful. Claudia says, I only meet friends or people who can help my business grow after work. I do the same thing, Claudia. I do the same thing because I don't have a lot of time, and it's not where I want to spend my time. So it has to have some value to me. And then there's personal value. So if it's someone who's a friend who's, who lives in Chicago and is only going to be here for that evening, I'll totally make time for that because it's a personal value. And so Claudia says, I see it as, am I getting paid for this? Yeah. This is what I meant about, the picking your brain piece. Now, when someone says, oh, can I take you to lunch and pick your brain? No, you can't. I'm worth more than the cost of a lunch. And I don't want people picking my brain. I still have like that really awful image of what that means. So yeah, I'm with you, Claudia. It's like, no, if you have a very specific situation that I can spend 5 or 10 minutes on with you to help you resolve it, chances are I'll say yes to that. And it will be on the phone. It won't be over coffee, and it won't be for me going, and it will be my convenience. So that's a piece of putting yourself at the center of your universe. It's selfish. And let me just say that all selfish means is self-care. Somehow we created selfish to mean at the expense of others, right? Selfish basically means I'm taking care of myself. I'm putting myself at the center of my universe. And if I don't, I can't grow my business. I can't be present to my family. I can't do my kayaking that I love. So that's the kind of thing that you want to think about, because it's what you value that helps you set these boundaries, right? So how much TMI is at work? The difference between friendly and familiar. Let's see if I can help you out with that. Okay, friendly is when you go to work and you say, I had a really great weekend. It was Father's Day. We had a barbecue. It was great. We had a lot of fun. Good, right? That kind of conversation is friendly, and it enhances and creates connection with others. And it builds trust. When we're connected to others, we build trust because we get to know one another. That's friendly. This is familiar. Familiar is I just learned that, let's say, that my husband is cheating on me. I know this is an extreme, but actually this happened to me. And you start telling everybody at work that your husband or wife is cheating on you. How do you think people are going to respond to that? That's pretty intense. Or if you say to someone, can you give a more practical example of familiar? Okay, let me think about that. So familiar is when you ask someone, okay, so how are you today? Right? And our typical response is fine, but every once in a while you get a person who answers it with, life is awful for me. I'm severely depressed. I think I'm going to go see a psychologist, and my dog is sick, and they go on and on and on and on about the ain't it awfuls, what I call it, the ain't it awfuls. That kind of stuff really doesn't belong at work. Maybe with your friends. I mean, you can vent for your friends. But so, you know, let me just ask you, what would be a question? What would be too much information at work for you? Write that in the comments area. When you've had this experience with someone has kind of crossed over into too much information. What does that look like for you? What do you hear? So how much time should you allow for personal talk with colleagues? Is it appropriate to talk about going through a separation or divorce? It depends. Okay, so that's kind of like the answer. Do people need to know that? If it's affecting your work, probably. You don't have to give them the gory details. You don't have to say how, you know, your ex or your soon-to-be ex is, you know, compromising your bank account, or, you know, they're evil people or all that stuff. That's way too much information. To be able to say, look, I need you guys to know that I'm having a really hard time right now. I'm going through a separation or divorce. If you see it affecting my work, you know, just gently let me know. So if I'm out a little more often than I am, I just want you to know that I'm dealing with something really critical in my life. Perfect. That's appropriate, because your behavior and your emotional state will impact, you don't leave it at the door when you get to work. It will impact your work, and you are going to need some additional support. Now, do you have to go into the details of that separation and divorce? No, that's not a requirement. You're basically giving enough information because of the impact of your emotional state on your team or on the group that you work with. And it helps to have a little support. Does that answer your question, Claudia? Ophelia, is that more practical? I came into a very familiar work culture, and I felt like I had to give all the details of my life, kids, etc. Now I kind of wish I hadn't, but it's good for building trust. It is, and that's why I said it depends. You know, in large companies, I find that the line is not as out there. People tend to keep their personal life closer to the vest, if you will. In smaller companies, though, or in small work groups, I find that people are more apt to share, and they get closer as a result. So that's what I mean about it depends. The culture of the organization has a lot to do with how much you share, how much you feel safe sharing. So I don't know how large your organization is, but you're right, it's not being Stanford. Yes, we're extremely small. So if you are, you're with these people 8-9 hours a day, you know, you build some pretty strong relationships. Yeah, you know, it could be appropriate. Yeah, less than 8 people, that's really small. So you are kind of in each other's lives. So here's the other side of that is you have to recognize, well, it's harder to recognize maybe when your personal boundaries are being crossed. So you kind of have to be a little more vigilant about your own personal boundaries and when they're being crossed, because you have such a tight-knit group, right? So it also becomes maybe a little harder to say, yeah, I'm not going out for drinks after work. It could, I don't know. Again, it depends on the culture of the company and the culture of your group. But does that, so Claudia said a more practical example. Does that help in terms of a more practical example? Okay, Ophelia, I also just noticed you said, what helps me also is when I set up my Outlook calendar and block the start and end time, or block time for preparation and lunch. Yes, so I think calendars can be, you know, a detriment or a resource. I block out my workout time, and I don't even have to answer to anybody. It's just that if I don't see it there, it's not going to happen. And so blocking out time, and you can just, if you're in a large organization, you can just say personal time or personal. If you have an administrative assistant, you know, one of the instructions I tell my executives to give their admins is make sure that they eat lunch. because half of them don't eat lunch. It's important to eat lunch, right? So I've got this 10-day challenge going on for people. I'll put the link in before we leave. And it's a 10-day challenge on managing your life before life manages you. And it has a lot to do with what you can do for yourself to be able to maintain your boundaries and your wellness, right? They're really simple things that you can tweak, and that if you did them consistently on a daily basis, there's like 10 or 11 lessons. If you did them consistently, your wellness would increase, your resiliency would increase, your peace of mind would increase, and you feel more in control of your life. So before we leave, I'll send you that link. Okay, what else are we saying here? Did we answer how much is too much information at work? Are you good with that? Are we good with that? Yes? No? Let me know. Let me know. Okay, so let's go to the other question. What are some signs of the inability to respect the boundaries of others? So what do you see in your environment? Like, what does it look like at, let's say, at work, as an example? Well, it doesn't always have to be at work. But what does it look like for you when someone is crossing either your boundary or someone else's boundaries? Give me an example of what it looks like. And I'll give you some examples, but I want to hear from you. What are some examples? Got my little cheat sheet here. I will give you, after this, for those of you who are on, I will send you a quick email follow-up with the link to download the sheet, which is on boundaries, 14 signs of the inability to maintain one's boundaries, and 16 signs of the inability to respect someone else's boundaries. And some of these we're talking about right now. Okay, so what have you seen signs of inability to respect the boundaries of others? When people come to my office and just start talking and not asking first whether I have the time. Yeah, that's a common one, Cindy. Happens all the time. That's a good one. So Ophelia says, I think setting boundaries, personal boundaries, is very important nowadays at work. I feel that HR will need to assist in training employees on this topic. It becomes non-productive when staff become emotional. Yeah. So HR takes on the boundary of, the personal space kind of boundary, right? So we're in a culture right now where sometimes it's an extreme. We can't touch one another. Heaven forbid a woman put her hand on a man's arm or vice versa. And a lot of that has to do with the culture. And there are really good reasons for some of these rules. Believe me, in my 20s and 30s, I experienced a lot of that, and there was no recourse at the time. So that's a huge personal boundary getting crossed. Another one is something as simple as you're in a meeting and you're constantly interrupted. That's a boundary. That's also a boundary. So if someone who does that, the interrupter, someone who's always interrupting people, doesn't understand personal boundaries because they don't allow you to finish your thought or your idea. And so in that case, calling attention to it, it doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be, hey, so-and-so, in the last 5 minutes you've interrupted me. Here's what I've noticed. In the last 5 minutes you've interrupted me 3 times. I would like to continue and finish my thought. And then it's just that you're not saying you made me feel or anything. You're just saying, here's what I noticed, here's what occurred, here's what I need to do right now. Okay, that's a way of taking back your kind of boundary, right? Okay, that's one of them. Another thing that happens, and more on a personal side, is, and and this happens a lot in relationships with spouses, is when the other spouse is consistently making decisions on behalf of the other spouse without checking in with them. So I don't know why, but I've seen this in the last couple of weeks. Someone I was talking to, basically just, you know, she was kind of making decisions on behalf of her husband. And when she told her husband, he was like, no, I wouldn't have done that. I wish you'd talked to me about it. That's a kind of crossing a personal boundary as well. So when people are making decisions on behalf of others without their permission, that's crossing a boundary. Kate, I told my boss something in confidence about my health in exchange for some basic accommodations, like occasionally working from home. 2 other people have repeated this information back to me. That's huge. Actually, that verges on even a potentially illegal issue. Yeah, when you tell someone in confidence, especially in that kind of situation, where you're telling your boss or an HR person or something, and that information is not kept in confidence. And in the case of medical information, that's pretty grievous. So, you know, I'm just curious, Kate, if you want to answer this question. If not, that's fine. But what actually occurred after that? Did you go back to your boss? What actually happened, or did you just let it go? I'm just curious. I'm curious whether I made it 100% clear that it was in confidence. Well, I would say, Kate, that if you're talking about your health, even if you didn't make it 100% clear, I would still think that from a manager's point of view, a good manager would be talking about that. I've let it go, but one of those 2 people is a customer who is visiting the office soon. I'm not sure how to address this now. Well, my question is, do you need to address it now? I mean, you're assuming that person remembers and is kind of feels it's as important as you feel. I think that's an assumption on your part. They very well might not even think it's important. It just feels important to you. So just don't bring it up. And if it does come up, you know, just own it and just say it doesn't impact my work, assuming it doesn't impact your work, which I wouldn't think so. Otherwise, more stuff would be going on. So that makes sense. Thanks. Okay, good. Ophelia, outside of my office, I have a printouts calendar of my daily schedule. Staff and physician add their names if they want to see me that day. Oh, that's good. That's a great idea. So outside of my office. Oh, you mean like physically, like near your door. I have a printout calendar of my daily schedule. Staff and physician add their names if they want to see me that day. So make sure that you build in time between. You don't want like schedule. You want to make sure that some space in between, whether it's 30 minutes every 2 meetings, is yours to recalibrate for the day. So Ophelia, take another look at that calendar and make sure that you've created you've blocked out some space for yourself to recalibrate for yourself, to take a breath, to go get a glass of water, to eat, you know? That's setting a personal boundary as well. Saying, no, don't fill in this time. And it could be just to catch up on phone calls. But, you know, what we do is we block every minute of our day. We feel like we have to take work home. We haven't made any time to actually do the work. We've been meeting all day. From the manager's point of view, your personal conversation with him or her is confidential and it should not be shared with anyone. I agree with Ophelia. This is for Kate. I totally agree that it should be confidential and should not be shared with anyone. And again, Kate, your customer probably doesn't even remember it or just doesn't really care. And if it's brought up, you know, just own it and move on. Don't give it any more importance because it probably doesn't have anything to do with your work. Okay. Any more? I'm looking at the questions. Anyone want to add to some of these questions? So go ahead and take another look at the questions. And please, 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 by the way, do answer my last question. It's important because I'm going to let you know before we close a couple of things. But I'm really looking for other topics you would like to see addressed in our luncheon conversations. And I'm going to address that at the end. But please answer that question because I want to make sure that I'm giving you what you want and what you need. Cindy, I recently had to go on oxygen. People have come straight out and asked why. Some are folks that I don't work with on a regularly. Someone actually grabbed my hands and prayed. I know they mean well, but it makes me uncomfortable. Ideas? Whoa, that's a biggie. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of reasons why people would ask you why you're on oxygen. So if I were you, I would create like a mantra or a response that maintains your sense of wholeness and your boundaries. And I don't know what that would be because it's your boundaries, not my boundaries. But think of a one-line response that doesn't explain. It just says, yes, I'm on oxygen because. So as an example, I'm making this up. It might not be your statement. So, Cindy, you'll have to come up with your own, but it could be, right now, I just need a little additional oxygen for my health, period. No explanation, nothing else, just that. That's what I'm talking about. Something like that, that gives them a response. Now, the person who is actually grabbed your hands and prayed, I think it's more their problem than yours. So I don't know the exact situation or the circumstances of it. Yeah, and I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you that if it were me, I would have told the person, this makes me very uncomfortable. Please don't do that. That would have been me, where I'm sitting. It might not be you. So the question to you is, if you had to do it over again and that situation occurred, what would you do differently that would maintain a personal boundary for yourself? That's the question I would ask you. What would you do differently? And if you want to share what that one line might be, and if you want to share on the comments area what you might do differently, I'll take a look at that if you're comfortable sharing that. If not, that's fine too. I hope that helps. That's a pretty extreme case. Okay, any other questions here? I'm looking. I'm waiting for you to fill out. I know it takes time to type, so I'm aware of that. Okay, also don't forget the poll. Setting personal boundaries is easy for me. Yes, no, or sometimes. Try to stay with yes or no. I will tell you personally, setting boundaries for me used to be difficult. And then, I just, because of the nature of my work, I can't work with others until, unless I'm working with myself. If I haven't developed myself beyond the development of my client, then I can't really serve. So I put an awful lot of effort, time, and energy in managing my own shit. Sorry. That's true. And that way I can help people with theirs. Okay, so Cindy says, I'm not sure about the praying because I don't want to hurt their feelings. I like the statement that you said. So again, by saying that you are uncomfortable with it, that should not hurt their feelings because you're not making a judgment on them and prayer. All you're saying is that it's affecting you in a particular way that makes you uncomfortable. So again, when you say, I don't want to hurt their feelings, is the interpretation you'd rather not hurt their feelings and be okay with being uncomfortable? Are you making a conscious choice there? Or are you kind of defaulting to an old behavior that puts other people before your own needs? Don't have to answer that. I'm just asking the question. Something for you to think about. Okay. What else can we talk about? Okay. Any more questions? Okay, so I want to bring up, so I have my little sheet here. Um, you know, there's one item on here where it says signs of inability to respect others' boundaries that it's kind of a simple statement, but it actually is pretty complicated. And it says, number 5 says, believe that their happiness depends on other people. This is for people who don't respect other people's boundaries. They believe that their happiness depends on other people. So that's an interesting comment to me because, you know, if our happiness depends on other people, wow, are we in trouble, right? Because if my happiness depends on making somebody else happy or pleasing someone, then where am I in the equation? What about me, right? So, and the thing is, you're never, ever, ever, ever going to please everybody. It's not going to happen. And it's inauthentic because it basically says, I will choose to be inauthentic in order to make someone else happy. So someone who doesn't really respect other people's boundaries, what they're going to do is they're definitely going to try to push their it's kind of a backwards kind of thing. It's like, okay, so if my happiness depends on other people, if I'm crossing your boundary and my happiness depends on you, I might start trying to take care of you in a way that you don't want to be taken care of. I might, as a perfect example, I might come and pray when I don't even know if you believe in prayer. So it's interesting when we talk about, you know, there's a line between trying to be a good person and needing, and that's the word, needing to please someone or to be accepted by someone or to be loved by someone. At that point, our boundaries are non-existent, right? Because we care less about ourselves and more about something else that's outside of ourselves, and that actually we can't ever control. So my happiness really depends on me, on my internal conversation. I can't manage, I can't control everything that happens in life. I can, however, look at both sides of it. So even when bad things happen, what I try to do is acknowledge what is. And sometimes I think it's much worse than what it really is. So really looking at the reality of the situation and saying, okay, you know, sometimes things are really difficult. And where's kind of the silver lining? So what does this, you know, maybe what kind of door does it open that I would not have expected it would open? So I'm trying to think of an example of when something went wrong and afterwards I figured out that it was the best thing. Oh, I've got it. So a long time ago when I was in Boston, I had a house. I ended up losing that house when I moved to Annapolis. I tried to keep it, but it didn't work out. And I lost the house. And I remember being just completely devastated over it. And it wasn't until years later that I realized it was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because I had a little son, you know, I had a baby, and all my effort was on my family during that time. I had moved to Annapolis already. Okay, now if I had had the burden of being a landlord, going back and forth to Boston, taking care of the property, blah, 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 it just would have been really hard for me to be present in my life and enjoy the life that I had with a little kid, which I really, really enjoyed. And so in retrospect, you know, you can look at some things that happen that may be somewhat difficult for you. I have this little saying that says, what if you're something like, I don't even remember it totally because there's so many things, but what if the challenge you're facing right now is really the doorway to your bliss? What if the challenge you're facing right now is really the doorway to your bliss? So it's a hard question, right? Because when we're in it, it's hard to see any kind of bliss or any kind of happiness or any kind of, you know, sometimes even hope. But we do find that it can be the doorway to something greater than what we ever conceived before. So I want you to think about that. And so again, it goes back to, what do I value? What do I care about the most? And that changes over time. And being aware of those things makes you aware of where you need to set those boundaries, what you're willing to compromise, what you're not willing to compromise, and how do you maintain your wholeness? Someone says, under what conditions or situation is it most difficult for you to set a boundary? When directly asked to share personal information, when I'm afraid of offending someone. So when you're afraid of offending someone, what I want you to think about is, how do you set a boundary without offending someone? So as an example, with Cindy, when she talked about the person who's praying and the oxygen tank, it was a very simple statement of it makes me uncomfortable. Now, I'm not telling that person, I'm not saying you're an awful person, I'm not saying anything about the other person. So really, to offend someone, you have to say something about them that's negative. I have to say, you're an awful person, or you're not doing this well, or whatever it is. But instead, when you want to set a boundary, talk about yourself, not the other person. And that's the best thing you can do. You can say, it's basically a statement of your being. So, this makes me uncomfortable. This isn't something that I would choose. I mean, there are ways of saying it depending on the situation. So Kate, my question is, does that help? I mean, by making a statement, about how you feel about it, or where your state of being is, would that help? And then to set a boundary with someone else? And then when directly asked to share personal information, the answer is no, if you don't want to, especially if it's personal information. So it's like, I don't feel that that's an appropriate question, would be my answer to that. Or this isn't an appropriate conversation right now. Something like that. Kate, yes, I like that. The challenge is often that I'm caught off guard, but that's a very generalizable approach that works in a lot of situations. Right, and so it helps to have it ready, so you're ready for it. So when it surprises you, you kind of have that statement in your back pocket kind of thing. So before we close, because I'm noticing the time, here's what we're going to do. Oh, one more thing. Ophelia, when someone asks something personal, I have the tendency to pause, allow time to the individual. Oh, beautiful. Allow time for the individual to recognize the inappropriate of his or her questions. I think that's a great comment. And Kate, I think, Ophelia makes a really good point right there. That's brilliant. Good. Thank you, Ophelia. I love it when other people are contributing. It's great. So real quick, news flash. I love doing these sessions. We have two that I've already talked to people about. One is that we talked about millennials, and Kate, who's on right now, is going to be a guest. Right, Kate? And I don't have the date right now, but I'll be sending it to you. And then Kate's a millennial. And then the other one was how to develop a strong mentoring protege relationship. How do you ask for a mentor? How do you create agreements around that relationship? What makes that relationship successful? So in my last question, what other topics would you like to see addressed in our luncheon conversations? Please let me know. And if you don't let me know here, shoot me an email because I'm developing them based on what you want. The other thing is the next 6 are going to be for a fee. Yes, I'm charging people for it, but not you guys. So there's the good thing. So I'm grandfathering in all 45 people who have registered up until now. And so the next 6 sessions are free for you. You just go do the same thing. But for you might have to re-register, however. I'll have to figure that out. I haven't figured out the technology, or I'll register you myself. And then I'll be charging a fee for the next 6 sessions. And I'm just doing packages of 6 Probably take a little time off during the summer when everybody's on vacation, like maybe a week or two. But I'd like to continue doing this. Do you guys want me to continue doing it? I mean, is this helpful? Ooh, Ophelia, topics on crucial conversation. Great topic. Thank you. I'm going to include that. There's also a book called Crucial Conversations. It's really good. And there's also another book I really like called Fierce Conversations. So I might bring a little bit of that in. Thanks, Ophelia. And any other topics, please let me know. I'm going to shoot everybody an email later today announcing the new program. Also, the fact that you all are grandfathered in for the next 6 as a thank you for starting out with me. And then now I have 3 topics. So I want to be able to have 6 topics. So if you have any suggestions for other topics, whether you're with me today, right now, or you're hearing this replay, because everyone has a chance to hear the replay, shoot me an email at alicia@aliciamrodriguez.com and let me know what topics. Final thoughts, final questions. Was this helpful? Oh, and FYI, because you guys are online live, I'm going to shoot you also an email with a download on boundaries as a thank you for coming online and being live with me today for lunch. Any other final thoughts, questions? Ophelia's, thank you. Thank you for coming. Anybody else? Final stuff? Taking a look. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. I'm off to Boston to see my family. So enjoy, and I'll see you next Thursday. Okay, thank you. Bye. Bye.